part of this comes down to the mindset of buying quality, but the other thing here is caring for these instruments. I mean, you've got to take care of them just like any other fine purchase, not, abuse them, not do things that the instruments aren't designed for. And certainly the sterilization is important with regards to avoiding environments where you can have pitting of your stainless steel, or corrosion.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now it's time to roll back and start the first case.
On this Vendor Spotlight, we speak with Dr. Mark Jewell, a recognized world leader in plastic surgery with offices and a medical spa located in Eugene, Oregon. And we're going to be talking about his experience with the Stille Surgical Instruments brand, which is distributed here in the U.S. by Synovis MCA. He's going to tell us about his experience also with those companies, and we're going to hear about some other products as well and instrument lines like S&T Instruments today, Melanie, which is really a story about quality, but I promise you so many other stories in this podcast.
There are so many stories, and we can learn through those shared stories, and hearing about the quality that these instruments have and how they can affect patient care is huge. And he's really got the stories he shares with us, and what we learn from it are fascinating.
All right, don't go anywhere. This is going to be a good one. We're going to be back after a short break with Dr. Mark Jewell.
A 17 Studios production, you're listening to First Case.
Joining us now is Dr. Mark Jewell, a recognized world leader in plastic surgery with offices and a medical spa located in Eugene, Oregon. Dr. Jewell, we're so excited to have you on this podcast to talk about Stille Surgical Instruments. And obviously they're partnered with Synovis MCA, which is what kind of brings us all together today. You've got so many unique stories. I hope we have enough time to get to them all.
Well, let's get started, Justin, and talk about Stille Instruments. And, I think there's a really interesting story of how I found my way to Stille, but also what I can tell surgical colleagues about the value proposition that Stille Instruments brings to their expertise.
Well, why don't we talk a little bit about your background? And as you said, I think it's going to lead us into the conversation about how you were introduced to Stille, because it was very early on in your career development.
It was, Justin. One of my medical student colleagues' father was a general surgeon in Kansas City, Dr. Miles. And early on, he kind of recognized that I had an interest in surgery. I used to go and operate with him, and he was Mayo Clinic trained, really technically gifted general surgeon. And I said, Dr. Miles, tell me about yourself. You're an excellent surgeon. How'd you get there, and what advice do you have to me? And he says, well, son, he says two things. He says, first, you hire yourself your own surgical nurse. She'll be with you. She'll take care of your instruments. She'll help your patients get in and out of surgery. And I said, well, thank you. Now, what about the second thing? He says, you only buy Stille Instruments. And he, at that point, put a needle holder in my hand, and he says, I want you to feel this thing. And I said, oh my God, it's really smooth and, very functional. And I kind of took that to heart. Throughout my general surgery training at UCLA, occasionally we'd be exposed to Stille Instruments. They actually had at Harbor General Hospital in Los Angeles some Stille Instruments that they literally bought after World War II. They were still very functional, had been renewed a couple times back at the factory, but I was impressed with the quality, the hand feel, the durability, and how these enabled me to operate better. So that was where I got started with Stille years ago.
So I want to ask, I mean, we're on a podcast talking about these instruments, but can you describe the difference that you noticed or felt when you held a Stille instrument versus another one?
Okay, well, Melanie, it's called hand feel. The ergonomics is correct. The scissors cut. Extremely dependable operational part of these instruments with regards to feeling like they belong, that you can operate with them and depend on them, versus something that feels gritty, that won't hold the needle, that won't cut right, things of this nature. So it's something that as a surgeon, I can put this instrument in my hand and operate, know that it'll take me where I want to go.
Well, Stille has this great reputation, 180 plus years of history making surgical instruments. They're located in Torshälla, Sweden, and you had a chance to go there. And the reason I know Stille is really the supercut scissor and just that whole design with the serrated edge and the knife edge and whatnot. But you got to see how they're also made, not just how they feel in your hand.
That's right. I had the opportunity a few years ago to go to their factory and actually sort of go through the whole building process of how they take a piece of stainless steel, put it in the furnace, hit it with the power hammer to flatten it out, hit it again after it's been heated red hot to make a blank for a scissor. And so that's kind of how it all gets started. This is all handmade work by craftsmen, and it really makes the difference in terms of starting out right, finishing the blank, putting it together, sharpening it, polishing it, and certainly putting the Stille proof mark on it, which indicates that it's met their specifications for quality and functionality.
So they're entirely handmade. There's no machine, assembly line process going on here. Is it in completely craftsman?
It's they standardize the blanks for the needle holders, the scissors, things of this nature, but it still comes down to hand finishing the instrument, making sure that it is, functional and that sort of thing. And also being very particular with regards to what the finished product is. I mean, these are amazing instruments that feel like they're broken in when they come right out of the box. In other words, there's no break-in time. There's no sort of, I'll have to use it a few times to get it smooth and all that stuff. I mean, it is completely functional, ready to use, and ready to help the surgeon do their job. So, again, I'm impressed with the quality control and how nicely these things come to me with obviously a Stille logo on them, and they're ready to use.
So you work in plastics.
Right.
And so obviously scarring is your enemy. And so I mentioned before, that I know Stille from the Supercut, which is a scissor that they invented in 1982. And the whole idea was a smooth, straight, efficient cut through soft tissue. Can you just talk about how, and I'm sure there are plenty of people out there working in the operating room who really already know this, but in your own words or from your own perspective, especially when it comes to patient outcomes that come to you for, surgery that, again, it's plastics. It's really important that we don't have any scarring.
Well, scarring can happen at skin level, but also scarring happens on the subsurface, where you've got scissor damage from a scissor that just crushes as opposed to cuts. And, even the ordinary Stille scissors, the silver colored ones, cut beautifully. But, the super cutters were really a step forward with regards to adding precision so that soft tissues could be crafted, cut, and made more ready for closure than before. So, again, the super cutter, years ago was a great benefit. And the latest version of them with the micro serrations are even more effective. And I say that because oftentimes as a plastic surgeon, I'm dealing with either scarring in the subsurface levels or really dense breast tissue that's very difficult to cut with ordinary scissors. But the super cutters with the micro serrations really work well here. And, it's kind of like a version of pinking shears if you are someone who sews and cuts through fabric, because, again, the micro serrations keep the tissue from squirting out of the scissor blades. And so, again, I think this really adds functionality to the ability to craft tissues without damage and with precision.
What does that do for your level of confidence during the procedure?
A lot, and I say that because, again, I want things to go well with regards to the flow of the operation. I know I can implicitly depend on my Stille scissors and the rest of my Stille instruments to help me be efficient and to produce the best outcomes. And, you mentioned scarring. I think that, again, we want to avoid instruments that crush tissue, and the Stille instruments really don't crush, they cut.
I think it's something that we can all remember. A patient only sees the external. They only see what maybe the incision looks like when they go home. They see the finished product, but it's just as important what's underneath the surface, what is going on in their tissues and their body, and knowing that you're not doing, I guess, extra tissue damage or damage to them internally because your instruments work and are precise has to give you a peace of mind in the work you're doing.
Right. Melody, it allows me to focus on what I'm doing to craft the outcome for a patient. For instance, this afternoon, I did a reduction mammoplasty, and there's a lot of work done within the breast tissue to reshape the breast into a smaller version of itself. And I was using my Stille super cutters with the micro serrations and was able to trim areas that needed to be trimmed so they wouldn't be so full once I reassembled the breast mound. And so it allowed me to do what I needed to do efficiently and without frustration. We as surgeons, we want to do everything possible to minimize frustration with our instrumentation in the operating room. So Stille is extremely dependable here with regards to their scissors, needle holders, forceps, all that kind of stuff.
What about the instrument guarantee? So, we're talking about performance and what it's like to use in the OR, but, there's a financial side to purchasing instruments, especially premium instruments, and also companies that really stand behind their work. So can you talk about the guarantee and even, if an instrument needs repair, right? Like scissors don't stay sharp forever.
Right. Well, first, Stille instruments have a 30-year guarantee, which is unheard of these days with regards to surgical instruments. They're very good about replacing instruments if they do break on you. For instance, it's not unusual sometimes that the box on the needle holder would crack or something like that. You send it back and they'll replace it. But, besides that, these are instruments that are designed with a very long service life. And in that, they can be renewed. They can be remanufactured. And, Stille is very smart here. They give you a coupon good for one resharpening of your super cutters. You send that back to the office in the U.S. and they package everything up and send it back to the factory for remanufacturing. And you get the instrument back. It's like brand new again. So, again, you're not having to buy another instrument as much as having the one you have refurbished, so to speak. And I've done this many, many times with my scissors, my needle holders, or if something needs sharpening or tightening up. So, again, these people stand behind their product nicely and admirably. I don't have situations where, I have to throw something away because it's not repairable. I mean, if it's a Stille, it is repairable or can be refurbished.
I have to ask, with your personal set of Stille Instruments, how old is the oldest one you have, or even how long have you had the instruments that you're using?
Well, I've got a good story to tell you there.
Oh, good. I want to hear it.
When I was finishing my general surgery residency at UCLA, my favorite scrub nurse, the day I was leaving, brought me this gift-wrapped box and a little card with it. It said how much she'd enjoyed working with me, during my residency there. And she said, "Oh, by the way, open this once you get off the hospital property." Anyway, what it was was a Stille Metzenbaum scissor and 2 long needle holders that were probably purchased back in the late 60s.
Wow.
I still have these instruments. In fact, I'm using them tomorrow on a facelift, believe it or not.
No way.
And so, my instruments go back many, many years.
That's incredible.
They certainly have held up very well. I mean, the needle holder's been back, I think, once to get tightened up or something, and the scissors resharpened. But, again, the longevity of these instruments is impressive. I've got rongeurs that I bought back in the late 70s that I used when I was doing hand surgery that are still, very nice. I mean, part of this comes down to the mindset of buying quality, but the other thing here is caring for these instruments. I mean, you've got to take care of them just like any other fine purchase, not, abuse them, not do things that the instruments aren't designed for. And certainly, sterilization is important with regards to avoiding environments where you can have pitting of your stainless steel, or corrosion. So caring for the instruments is good. I took Dr. Miles' advice and have a surgical nurse that's been with me for 42 years. So, she knows the Stille drill very well and takes great care of my instruments. So it's taking care of something that will continue to have a very long service life and bring you lots of happiness as a surgeon every time you use it. So, that's sort of the way we take care of our instruments every day.
For sure. I'm curious, with Stille's instruments, is there anything that stands out or that's different about their care and handling, that's something that someone in sterile processing or in the operating room would need to be aware of when they are taking care of these instruments after you've used them?
Well, I think, again, the staff at the surgery center knows about Stille instruments, that they should be handled not, thoughtfully, but, again, not abused. At the same time, we separate out the Stilles from the ordinary instruments. Last thing I'd want to see in sterile processing is a whole handful of whatever instruments, in the ultrasonic washer or stuff. In other words, they do pull out the Stilles and sort of handle them individually just to keep them nice and shiny and prolong service life, and not, have an open a pair of scissors that are open, in contact with everything else that could dull the blades. But, again, I think nothing special has to be done with Stille. I mean, when I was at the factory years ago, trays of Stille instruments coming back, and they looked like they'd been through the sterile processing many, many times at one of the Swedish hospitals and still looked in pretty good shape.
That's cool. Yeah, always follow the IFU, of course, and make sure you're taking care of them properly. But just idle curiosity as to whether or not there was anything really specific with their care and handling.
No, I don't think so. I mean, some of the finer microsurgical instruments require lots of tender loving care just because any minor ding will render them not operable. But the Stilles are pretty darn tough. I've been impressed with the quality of the alloy, how well it stays sharp, how it does not corrode, and that we don't seem to have problems of galling, where the instrument becomes difficult to open and close, things of this nature. It's not like you got to put instrument milk on it or something like that to make it smoother, so to speak. So, that's not been an issue with the Stille Instruments.
It just speaks back to its craftsmanship and its workmanship and how the premium design of it feeds into every aspect of the instrument, even, taking care of it.
Yes, I agree. I mean, you pay a lot for these. At the same time, the performance is so impressive.
Yeah, well, how many other brands of instruments are we still having around from the 60s? And we're still using them every day. So I think that's...
I don't think... Well, there are things that are really hard to kill, like an Army Navy or a Deaver or a Richardson retractor. I mean, those things just don't have any moving parts, and, they get used and abused. But, again, the finer instruments, your forceps, your needle holders, your clamps, and your scissors. No, there are not a lot of those around from the 70s, 80s, or even 90s, and again, so many of these instruments are made, in sweatshop conditions in foreign countries that, again, the only consideration here is price, not quality.
Makes a big difference.
Oh, it does, and in July of this year, I had a young associate join me. And he already has been indoctrinated with Stille. But, again, it's something I look forward to bestowing on him, my surgical instrument set. It's sort of like, you never own these things. You just get them ready for the next generation of surgeons. So, I think a gift like this for a young surgeon to get started correctly will help his technique improve outcomes and certainly make him more efficient in the operating room.
So, Mark, this whole podcast is in a partnership with Synovis MCA, and they're the exclusive stocking distributor for Stille Instruments, but they also have a portfolio that includes S&T instruments, and they have a new product called the Pathy Light Jacket. And I didn't know, have you had an experience with S&T instruments and this new product?
I have, Justin, and let me speak to that both in terms of the S&T instruments and also the light jacket. I think that Synovis is looking to expand its product offering. And certainly, they've got a good group of instruments that they sell every day. And, the premium line of Stille is an excellent fit with what they offer. And certainly, doesn't take away from anything that they're selling, but it allows surgeons, if they want, to go up market to the impeccable quality of Stille. And innovation is part of all this. And this light jacket device that I've had the opportunity to use is very useful. As plastic surgeons, we operate in cavities and holes and need additional surgical illumination. This is a really sharp little device that fits on the end of your cautery and allows for a LED light to illuminate very nicely the inside of a cavity, such as a breast implant pocket or dissecting under a flap, things of this nature that you would normally require a fiber optic, cable retractor assembly. And so, something like this is a very useful way of avoiding the hassles of a fiber optic retractor, things of this nature. You can use a basic retractor and then this light jacket device on the cautery pencil. So it's something that I think is a advance over conventional fiber optic illumination. I like it because the color correction is excellent. We're not dealing with too blue of a LED light, which sometimes hides bleeding, things of this nature. So the color rendition of the device is really important here, and I think it's excellent.
Okay, I have a question about that. I'm thinking through, you have a light sleeve that goes on the cautery pencil.
This is a self-contained light source. It does not require cords or anything like that. You literally put it over the end of your cautery pencil.
Way.
And then you can use the electrosurgical cutting to shape or dissect very nicely.
And is it always on? Like, or does something turn it on if it has no cords?
Well, you can turn it on and off, and it has, several hours of light capability. So,
okay.
It'll last, for a case, and then it's disposable.
Well, that's really cool. All right. So that is amazing to me as a circulator to think of something else I don't have to make sure is plugged in. I don't have to have a light box. I don't have to have a light source. But then from the surgeon standpoint, you don't have to have another retractor. You don't have to have a fiber optic cable, all these other things getting in the way. So I see a huge benefit to having something like this. It would make it smoother for you while you were operating, right?
Yeah, it really does. And, again, I can depend on this little light source on my electrosurgical pencil to illuminate a cavity, a breast implant pocket if we're doing dissection there, or a capsulectomy or capsulotomy very, very nicely. So it's cordless. The color is very correct. Some of the other types of retractors have a very blue appearing light in terms of the light temperature that hides bleeding, makes it difficult to see where the bleeding's coming from. But the color is excellent on this in terms of rendition. So there's nothing that you're going to miss because of incorrect color of the LED light. And this has longevity. It'll last for the duration of a case. And from there, I think it's a good advance to use this as opposed to the hassles of fiber optic cables, fiber optic generators, cords to the wall, all these sorts of things that can fail.
Yeah. And I have to admit, there's been several times I forgot to have a light source in the room and had to go run in to go find one because I didn't have one in the room, and, we had to plug it into something. So off I ran to go get a light box. So I can see this saving some steps for people too.
Oh, I agree. And you save time and you save money. And you think about the cost of having to go find something. The operating room costs at least $1 a second. And for you to go down the hall to find something, or ask somebody else to bring a fiber optic generator in, or, something out of sterile storage, that adds up. So just, opening a package and dumping it on the back table of this little light source really saves a lot of money.
All right. I have a couple of other questions, and they kind of piggyback off of what we were talking about earlier, but I didn't really ask it directly. And one is, I talked a lot about scarring, etc., but I want to ask you this very directly. Do you think it's possible to link patient benefits and surgical outcomes back to the instruments? I get it that you like the instruments, but how would you make a connection like that?
Well, I think part of this here is avoiding instruments that crush tissue. Crushed tissue just doesn't heal as well. You want tissue that you've cut precisely that will heal nicely. And this starts at the surface with regards to being able to accurately control your scalpel blade. Stille makes scalpel blade holders, knife blade holders that will fit the standard, 10, 15, and 11 blades. They're very comfortable to hold and give great precision when you're making that initial cut. The scissors, as we've talked about, give precision. They don't crush tissue. And when closing, the Stille forceps, I think, do an excellent job of holding tissue without excessive tissue damage. I'm talking about either the Brown Adson or the standard Adson type forceps. Excellent handling. And, the feel of a Stille forceps when you're closing is superb. They don't take excessive force that fatigues your hand compared to other brands of forceps. So, being able to hold tissue effectively without applying a large amount of force prevents crushing also. So, the least amount of trauma we inflict on tissues, the better they heal.
Well, I do want to let everybody know that we have some bonus content if you have downloaded the smartphone application for iPhone and Android. And included in that is a white paper that I think will speak very directly to your comments, Dr. Jewell. And the last question I want to kind of pose to you, because we talked about the finances a little bit, just around, the warranty and the quality. And, you described still having a Stille instrument from very early in your career, right? Like you were just getting started and that instrument is still in use today. I think that's phenomenal. But, we don't always get to have control over our purchasing decisions. And I think it's always important to, kind of lay out how we make justifications for quality. What would that look like related to a set of Stille instruments for you? How would you coach people to talk to maybe the supply chain or the finance folks when they're trying to get them approved?
Well, I think that hospitals and surgery centers do want to please surgeons. And, part of this is having a set of instruments that the surgeon likes, can depend on, and also enhances functionality. That being said, if there is some resistance to price, have a plan here. In other words, start with the instruments you most require, which would be your scissors and your needle holders. Go from there to, your forceps used in closure. And certainly, an ordinary set of non-crushing vascular forceps, the debakis, so to speak. I mean, you can use anything by anybody, in some of the deeper layers until you get your own Stille instruments. A range of needle holders is certainly important to have simply because, again, some of the smaller Stille needle holders, the so-called Halsey's or the Webster style, work beautifully for the smaller needles, the 6/0s, 7/0s, and 5/0 type suture. But what's amazing here is most of the Stille needle holders will take a range of needles from literally a 2/0 all the way up to a 7/0 suture very nicely without straining or breakage. So, again, a Stille needle holder is very versatile and can certainly accept a wide range of needle sizes when you're operating. So the versatility is important here. But, again, back to the plan, keep hammering away at the purchasing people that you do need better instruments. And I think for the most part, they will accommodate you. And that's important. I have the good fortune of having lots of Stille instruments that I bought on my own. The surgery center keeps them for me, but also has bestowed upon me a few more of these lovely instruments for me to use every day.
Well, I do want to let everybody know that you can engage with Stille, and many customers do every single month. Simply send them an email, sales.us@stille.se, and Stille is spelled STILLE. Many of you are likely already aware of that. You can engage the professional and experienced distributor Synovis MCA, which covers the entire U.S. and is a subsidiary of Baxter International based in Birmingham, Alabama. Again, they have a team of dedicated reps with deep clinical support experience. They work directly with surgeons and they deliver the highest quality instrumentation on the market. Their website is synovismicro.com. That's synovismicro.com. You can also call them toll free, 800-510-3318. And I do want to emphasize bonus content, that white paper available on our smartphone app for iPhone and Android. Dr. Jewell, as we kind of wrap up here, and I want to thank you for coming on, but I also want to ask you, do you have any kind of final thoughts or anything we didn't talk about during the discussion that just should absolutely be mentioned?
Oh, I do have a couple more comments, Justin. Part of learning about Stille is to get on their website and learn of their story. They have a lovely part of the website that the Stille ambassadors, who are recognized world-class surgeons, are highlighted there. And I really would encourage people to look at the stories that all of us as Stille ambassadors speak about the quality of Stille and how these instruments have really improved our careers by using them. So the more you learn about Stille, the more you will come to love them. The other thing here is that Stille is oftentimes at a variety of the trade shows. Take a few minutes, go to the Stille booth, put the instrument in your hand, and you will fall in love with it. It's just got a lovely hand feel, whether it's the super cutter scissors, the needle holders, the forceps. You'll probably want to buy some on your own. They feel so good just to, get started on Stille. But, again, being able to feel and experience the loveliness of these instruments is a strong selling point.
Dr. Jewell, phenomenal job on the podcast. I feel like you've done this before. And you're a great storyteller too, which makes it so much fun and engaging for the audience. And I just have to thank you for that. I mean, you had several stories for us that I think, also just very entertaining to speak with today, not to mention the valuable information about your experience with Stille that you brought forward.
Well, there's nothing generic about Stille instruments. They're special and they deserve to be used in the best of circumstances to produce the best of outcomes for patients. They're the best in the world.
That was Dr. Mark Jewell, a recognized world leader in plastic surgery with offices and a medical spa located in Eugene, Oregon. And Melanie, we had a great conversation about his experience with Stille Surgical Instruments going back 30 years, while the company and their manufacturing of surgical instrumentation goes back over 180 years. And I've always known of that supercut, that black-handled scissor. It's been around since they invented it in 1982. And, a couple of things that really stands out is just the handmade craftsmanship. There's an art form to this that really comes into creating the quality. And then a little shout out to Synovis, which is a subsidiary of Baxter International based in Birmingham, Alabama, where Stille recently merged with S&T Instruments. And, I thought that whole conversation in detail that Dr. Jewell gave us about the Pathy medical light jacket was really interesting too, Melanie. So just a great conversation. I love a good storyteller, and Dr. Jewell is a great storyteller.
Yes, he is. I enjoyed talking to him. It was really interesting to find out about the craftsmanship of the Stille instruments and that they're not the mass-produced bulk instruments you get from other companies. And the care that goes into creating them was just fascinating. Like you said, he's a great storyteller, but he really gave us some really good info through his stories. And I learned a lot listening to him.
Well, phenomenal with the 30-year warranty, lots of other value. I thought he did a great job of how to get started and make the case for quality instrumentation. I do want to remind everybody once again that you can get bonus content by downloading our smartphone app for iPhone or Android. You'll get the white paper that really substantiates a lot of what we heard from Dr. Jewell today. You can send an email to sales.us@stille.se. And if you don't know how to spell Stille, it's STILLE. And then again, contacting directly Synovis MCA, which covers the entire U.S., sells Stille and the S&T instrument brands. Their website, synovismicro.com, Synovis, SYNOVIS, micro.com. You can also call them directly toll free at 1-800-510-3318. That's going to do it for this vendor spotlight, but certainly appreciate everybody listening in today. I do want to remind you that if you're not going to download the smartphone app, you can follow us on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts. You can find find us on Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify. And really, if you just search First Case on your favorite podcast application, if you're not using any of those and you're not going to download the smartphone app, you can certainly find us by searching for us. We also really do appreciate and encourage your feedback for Melanie and I, just around topics, maybe even themes for seasons or guests that you'd like to recommend, or just general feedback, especially if there's something that you heard on the show that you put into practice. We want to hear about it. We want to highlight that. And you can do so by emailing info@firstcasemedia.com. On behalf of Melanie and myself, thank you so much for listening to this Vendor Spotlight on First Case.